What's up, everybody? It's Soren Baker here on Unique Access and on the Digital Soapbox Network. We're listening here today, and we appreciate you guys tuning in, watching, subscribing, sharing, downloading the Soren Baker Show, because we've been able to have a nice run here of established, esteemed guests, and we're very fortunate and thankful for that. And today, we hope to carry on that tradition with our esteemed guest. He's a pioneering rapper that I've known for a long time, and I'm really glad to bring him in because we got a lot of interesting things to discuss, especially how rap has evolved since he got in the game. And without further ado, let's introduce Mellow Man Ace. Thank you for coming through, sir.
Absolutely. You already know.
Yes. So Mellow Man Ace and I have known each other a long time, and we first met in the late 90s, 98, when I was doing a story for the LA Times on the then wave that Big Pun, or Big Punisher at the time actually even, was doing with the Latino rap movement and everything. So Ace and I got to be cool at that point, and we've kept in touch and seen each other and talked a lot over the years. And I think it's very important to highlight a lot of his contributions to the game, which is what we'll be doing today, in addition to seeing what he's got going on now, and some very exciting news that's developing in his hometown. So, Ace, let's get into this. Your hometown, in California at least, is Southgate.
Southgate, CA, absolutely.
Yes. So most people don't know. They may have heard of Southgate, but it's definitely not a Compton, a Watts, an Inglewood,
right,
a South Central. So explain to people that are not from Southern California, what is Southgate and where is it?
Southgate is southeast of here. Okay, it's from Hollywood, basically.
Right.
And we're the forgotten city between Linwood, Compton, and in there, and Watts.
Right.
Okay, we're the other city, and predominantly Latino community. And that's how we came up right down the street and across the tracks from South Central, or Watts, what you call Watts,
right,
California. And so we're that little forgotten city. And then if anybody's old enough to remember, there was a Pete Ellis Dodge commercial that had a jingle, and it would go, Long Beach Freeway, Firestone exit, Southgate. And that's how people will remember us. And sometimes you'd have to sing the jingle in order to jog people's memory about where you lived. But it was a good upbringing, you know what I mean? And I'll never forget it. I learned a lot of lessons right there.
And through your brother and through Cypress Hill, of course, the area also got known as well. So coming up with Sen and everything, how did you guys, what drew you in particular to rap early on?
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of all of us because it was such a tight-knit unit at that time. And I believe it had to be when we first saw Wild Style.
Okay.
The movie Wild Style for the first time.
So this is probably 82-ish?
Yeah, in there. I mean, we had been hearing hip-hop, from the minute when word go in 79, when
right,
you heard Rapper's Delight and These Are the Breaks and records like that. But I don't think we really were inspired yet. A lot of us were still trying to be athletes. Myself and Muggs were baseball players. Sendog was a football player. And that's what we were focusing on. And then at the same time, we started to, maybe breakdance a little bit after watching Wild Style. But we hadn't thought about grabbing the mic yet. And then I think the most influential MCs for us as a crew, as a whole, had to be the Ram LZ and a brother by the name of Mr. Schick of the Mean Machine. So between those two dudes, those two classic MCs, that's kind of how we first started to, start writing rhymes. And
so most people, of course, from that era would have gravitated more to the Grandmaster Caz's or the Kool Moe D's per se.
Yeah.
So why did you find interest elsewhere?
Well, Ram LZ was, he would say, So I shot across town to Cypress Hill, right? He would say lines like that. So I took my dog up to see my boy, fucking with a nigga with a sucker, you know what I mean? And we lived on Cypress Ave.
Right.
So when he said Cypress Hill, that made plenty of sense for me and my brother to fall in love with that, right? And then Mr. Schick, because he spit a little bar of Spanish, a verse of Spanish in a song called Disco Dream. It had to be like in 1981, 82 in there. So those were the two most influential, you know what I mean?
And I think it's also interesting and noteworthy to explore, too, that it wasn't even, at this point, even though hip-hop culture was starting to expand and evolve nationwide and throughout the world even at this point, it still wasn't about the rapper yet. It was still much more about the overall culture, and you, like you were just saying, you were even more drawn toward the b-boy aspect of it.
Sure.
So, and you talk about that a lot in especially your early material too, but about being about hip-hop culture, whereas a lot of people now look at everything totally separate and like, oh, I'm a rapper, and they don't discuss DJing or b-boying or graffiti. So for you, what was it early on that made you gravitate toward dancing in particular?
Well, I think that was probably the first flu bug from hip hop for me, you know, because again, the Ram LZ, he was the MC for the Rocksteady crew. A lot of people don't know that or remember that, but there used to be a rhyme that he would say, this is the mellow they call the Ramel, the shock with the rhythm, and you know what I mean? All this stuff. And like, this is the mellow, you know, I like that. And that made me look further into him. And then, you know, when we first saw Wild Style, we didn't know any of these guys, you know, we didn't know, right? So then, back then, you used to have to do what's called the knowledge, right?
Research.
You had to wait for magazine articles to come out or newspaper clippings of that were coming from the East Coast in order to find out who all these players were. Who was Africa Bambaataa? Why is he important? What was a cool herc? What does this mean? And so that's kind of how we did it. And staying tuned to like David Letterman's show when Rocksteady Crew was on it, or even the Funky 4+1 More. So it was about seeking it, you know, doing the knowledge, trying to absorb as much from 3,000 miles away as you possibly could, right? So for myself and the crew, we were just like, breakdancing made the most sense at the time. There wasn't like a whole lot of MCs out yet, but b-boying, we knew that we could get girls and rock a party and
all the important things.
Yeah, all the important things, right? But I'll tell you what changed that was when this move called the 1990 came out. And that's spinning vertically on one hand up and down like this. And your head's this way, you know, and you're spinning on your hand like this vertically. And I couldn't do that move. And I said, I tap out right here.
Okay.
You know, and so that's when Sucker MCs came out. We're looking now at 83 in there, 10th grade. And that's when I first started to write rhymes, and I believe my brother as well.
Okay. And then how did that, beyond the physicality of changing from dancing to writing, like how else did you notice maybe that helped you change or forced you to change as a person?
Well, I think we weren't really noticing that change.
Okay.
But when we saw Crush Groove come out in Beat Street, we knew that there was a bigger picture, that we could now take this thing called rap and be on the big screen one day with it. And I think that was the driving force, especially for me and my brother, because B wasn't in it yet. B wasn't, I hadn't found B at that juncture, you know what I mean? But for me and Sen, we were thinking like, wow, we want to be like Run DMC and them dudes, you know? And so I think what it did change was taking a b-boy mentality to the mic, you know, and how do you do that? And I think that was the most intricate part of what the change was.
All right. And then as this time was happening, of course, this coincides, unfortunately, with the explosion of the crack epidemic and all the super escalation of violence in Southern California. And when you realized that was going on, what was happening in your specific neighborhood, your family, and what you were seeing?
Sure. I mean, there was a double-headed monster at that time. There was the crack epidemic, and then there was gang culture that would call to us the minute we walked out the door. You know what I mean? And some of us, we parlayed. You know what I mean? And a lot of us partook. You know,
right?
In both of those things. You know what I mean? But I think overall, we knew. We had a sense that we were meant for something bigger, especially my brother and I, because we came from a communist country.
Right.
And our parents always instilled that we're going to go for a better life.
Well, for those that don't know, you're Cuban.
Yeah, we're Cuban, born in Cuba.
Right.
So I myself, I won the Cuban lottery to get my family here to the United States. So growing up, my family would always call me the lucky charm, the lucky charm. You're the lucky one, the lucky charm. So I always knew inside, like, I was destined to be somebody. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to explain, but that's really how I felt. Like, I had never took a loss at anything I did. And we won't even get into, like, why, but
why not?
well, it wasn't until later.
Okay.
But growing up, we had a sense of we have to do something great to do for our families, you know, and help our parents, you know, who worked their butts off to get here. And, you know, when they did get here, you know, they worked all the time. We rarely saw it. We raised ourselves. You know what I mean? The community back then, it was big to have. They had that saying, it takes a village.
Right.
And that's really how we did it.
And what was the sense of your community, would you say? Because you were saying Southgate at the time was largely Latino. So why do you think that part of L.A. County had that demographic at the time?
That's a great question. You know what? I really couldn't tell you. I mean, in the 1970s, it was a predominantly Anglo-Saxon community. And when we got there in 71, 72, during the Vietnam War and all these things that were going on, we saw a tide change. And a lot of Latinos from Cuba were coming. You know, a lot of Cubans was coming and posting up there in that city, the city of Bell as well, and the city of Downey. And then there was already, like, lineage Latinos there. You know what I mean? Mexican, predominantly Mexican. And so, you know, we just kind of had to adapt to what was going on. We came from a place from dirt floors,
right?
Soviet tanks on our block, that type of stuff, you know? And then to see free goods at your local store where we had rations, you know, and we didn't have Christmas gifts and all this stuff. So it was like a big culture shock to be able to go to Save-Ons and see, like, Hot Wheels just hanging on the rack, and you could just stick them in your pocket and break out the store, you know what I mean? So we'd go boosting and stuff like that because we didn't know better. We come from a communist country where we had nothing.
Right.
So now you come out here and you see everything out in the open, you just start grabbing shit, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy because I've had the fortune to travel to a number of countries through work and on vacation and stuff, and it's just amazing. People don't understand, as bad as America is in a lot of ways, how phenomenal it is in so many other ways.
Word.
They really do not get it.
Word.
They really don't. And I knew that from reading a lot, but I also saw it firsthand when I would go to different countries and third world countries. And, you know, you go to the Caribbean and the beach might be nice, but once you go that 10-minute ride inland, you're like, whoa, this is not
Yeah, but turn back.
Yeah, you better go back to the beach.
Yeah, straight up.
It's a whole different world.
No doubt.
And, there's elements of that too in Europe and some of the other places I've been. But anyway, it's just interesting that people don't really understand or appreciate that. And it's just kind of wild. And as your career progressed, one thing I think too, a lot of people don't understand, or as you were developing being an artist, how and why did you end up with Delicious Vinyl? Because I don't think a lot of people affiliate you with them, even though they put out your first material.
Word. Well, I had such a short stay there. Realistically, the way it happened was my man DJ Muggs was going up to the studio when he was with 783.
Okay.
He was going up to the Delicious Vinyl studio to cut a record. I believe it was called Madman World. And it was going to be for the movie Colors, right? So he come by the block and to see who wanted to go with him to the studio. I think I was the only one on the block that day.
Okay.
And I said, yeah, I'll roll with you. Well, that day is where I met Matt Dyke, rest in peace, and Mike Ross.
Okay.
Who are the founders, of Delicious Vinyl Records. And they were, as the day progressed in the studio, they came out, dusted out, how always how they were, hence the name the Dust Brothers.
The Dust Brothers.
And they said, we just started a record company, and we just signed a dude by the name of Tone Loc, and another guy. He goes to USC. His name is Young MC.
Right.
And I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. But I rap too. I even rap in Spanish, and they were like, what? And at the time, my dad had kicked me out of the house for not wanting to keep a job.
Okay.
So I'm living in the hood, at the hood house, and I was like, wow, this could be a chance to get out of the hood house and get back home, And so they presented the opportunity to come back and record the next day and see how I sounded. And if I sounded garbage, I wasn't going to get anything.
Right.
And if it sounded dope, they were going to offer me a deal. So I came back. I think I borrowed my mom's car that day, because we didn't even have no money. We were broke. So I borrowed the car, go back up there the next day, and they turn on this beat that turned out to be Let's Do This. And on the flip side was Mas Pingong. Anyway, and I did a rhyme that I had from the struggle years, a Spanish rap.
Okay.
That I would do at all the Cuban clubs in Southgate, backyard parties and whatnot, and they loved it. And they loved it, and they said, "Okay, yeah, we love it, man. We're gonna do it. We're gonna give you a deal." And sure enough, they did, and I was then able to parlay that into a major deal at Capitol. So my stay at Delicious was very brief, but for one single.
But how did that work then? They just signed you to a single deal? And they didn't...
Yeah, they signed me to a single deal, right? And in the interim, they put Loc, Young MC, and myself on the road with T. La Rock.
Okay.
Who was doing a West Coast run. Exactly. And our first show was San Diego State University.
Wow. That's a big venue.
And, it was a hall. It wasn't the football field or nothing like that.
I should say a big school.
It's a big campus, right. And so we thought like, yo, we made it, yo. You know what I mean? We get to the show, and it's like 10 people there.
Okay.
And I remember it's T. La Rock, who got the hot record burning on the radio, Tone Loc, Young MC, and myself, and it was 10 people there. Well, one of those people happened to be Kenny Ortiz, who was an A&R man from Capitol Records, who came to the show specifically to see my set. So after that set, and at this time, Muggs is my DJ, Sen and B are my dancers, right? Because every MC had dancers back then. Or a lot of them,
Most, yes.
Most.
Many.
Yeah, plenty. And so he stepped to me after the set, because we went hard, no matter what. It was 10 people there, and we didn't know he was there, but we still went hard. We did the set. We took no shorts. And he said, yo, I'm Kenny Ortiz, gives me his business card. I work for Capitol Records, and we wanna sign you to a contract. And I was like, yo, that's dope and everything, but I'm signed at Delicious Vinyl already. And they were like, don't even wet that. We're going to buy out that contract and keep it moving.
Okay.
And sure enough, when we got back to L.A., you know, he said, give me a call on Monday. I did. They worked out the particulars with Mike Ross. And I think, you know, because the aesthetics were that, you know, Loc and Young were doing great on those projects, but they didn't have enough money yet to repress those records. So here comes my Capitol deal, breaks them off somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, I think it was 45 racks, right?
Okay.
Now Matt and Mike have money to
flip right.
and double up on those Loc records and Young records. And then I go to Capitol Records, right? Well, in that, I had introduced Sen and Be Real to Mike Ross to get them going. And I don't know what happened there, it just never panned out. And they ended up with Rough House.
Okay. Well, back to getting with the Dust Brothers / Mike Ross, etc. What did you, looking back, what did they do, or what opportunity do you realize beyond the fact of making the record? Like, what was it that you learned or were able to build and have this, you know, to launch your career from what you learned, what you saw, what you did during your short time at Delicious Vinyl?
Well, I learned two things, really. I learned, it was Matt Dyke, you know, rest in peace, who introduced me to putting rock and roll on hip hop. So we did a song called Hip Hop Creature.
Right.
And then I think Cypress liked that, and that's kind of the route they took later on. But and then I learned, you know, that they were the first people who took a chance on Spanish and bilingual Spanglish rap. You know, at the same time, because I may not be your illest wordsmith by any stretch of the imagination, but one thing I give myself credit for, I took pride in my versatility, being able to spit in English and Spanish, bilingual, club jam, ballad.
Well, that's Hip Hop Creature is the first song off of Escape from Havana, your debut album, and it definitely sets the tone for that. And that was something that when I first heard the album back in '89, I just remember thinking it was very, very diverse, not only sonically, but thematically, obviously with the language. So why was that something that was important to you to do on your first shot?
To be honest with you, I mean, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do on the album.
Okay.
And it seems like whoever came with a dope beat is who we went with. You know, if Muggs had a dope beat, we did River Cubanos. Def Jeff came with a dope beat for a Spanish rap. We called it En La Casa. Tony G came with a club track called Mentiroso, and that worked. And then the Dust Brothers came with the guitars again on Let's Do This and Mas Pingong and on Hip Hop Creature. You know, it just all felt right, you know. And then we filled it in with doing old Cuban rhythms, classic Cuban rhythms from Cuba. This one particular one called Rap Guanco, which was when Tony G was playing the percussion all the way through it, which is basically a Guanco rhythm from Cuba. And then we just rapped to it. And I didn't know we were doing some cutting edge stuff at the time, but that's exactly what happened.
And before we get into your album in particular, Escape from Havana, I thought it was interesting because at that time, Capitol didn't have a lot of rap acts, but they did have King T before you, and then they had Hammer or MC Hammer soon after you.
Sure.
So for what at the offices or just in passing or what have you, like did you have interaction with either of them at the office? Like did you guys talk about Capitol? Did you not know them at the time?
To
like,
be honest, man, I had more interaction with the Beastie Boys than King T and MC Hammer.
Wow.
Because the Beasties were coming to the Delicious Vinyl Studios to mess with Mario C.
Gotcha.
Who was the engineer of my album. right, and Loc and Young's albums. So we would run into Ad Rock and MCA at Delicious Vinyl, and they were moving. They were making a move from Def Jam over to the West Coast. They didn't know where they wanted to land, but they knew Mike and Matt really well. And I thought it was going to end up the second Beastie Boy album was going to be on Delicious Vinyl for a second. But they went to Capitol. So when they came over to Capitol, now we had the Beastie Boys, King T, myself, and then they added Little Sean, who was, I think, one of Big Daddy Kane's proteges.
Well, he had the big song, Hickey's on Your Chest, was one of his big ones.
Yeah. So, and Hammer never entered the building.
Okay.
He was never seen. He was the rock star.
Gotcha. So with the Beastie Boys, it's interesting that they left Def Jam, got to work with Mario C, and this is the Paul's Boutique era.
Sure.
Right after License to Ill, well, years after License to Ill, but the subsequent album, I should say. And I always thought it was interesting, their move out here. So given their success, given they were from New York, given they were white, given they would move to another city and they were trying to figure out what was going on in their lives or whatever, what was interesting to you about getting to spend time with them in that era?
Well, for me, we never tracked anything. We didn't work together. It was just more about going to hang out at the studio. And whoever got on a beat, got on a beat. And smoking a little weed, just hanging out. And I think it was more impactful for the soul than anything else, you know what I mean? Because we built a friendship that would last a long time.
Right.
But other than that, it was just the camaraderie of it all, and then being a fan of theirs since License to Ill and wilding out in the clubs to their stuff, it was pretty, surreal too, you know what I mean?
Okay.
Because you grew up like, fans of theirs, LL Cool J and Run DMC and Public Enemy and anything Def Jam.
Right.
So for me, I found it a little hard not to be too awestruck, you know what I mean?
Okay.
Or too fanboy-y, but I kept my composure.
Well, that's good.
And we all ended up cool, so.
Yeah, and then you, of course, had tremendous success with Mentiroso. So why do you think that song resonated with so many people?
Honestly, I think it's because there had been nothing like it up to that point, and when they got wind of it in countries like Colombia and Costa Rica and El Salvador, Argentina, it was almost like we were becoming an ambassador, a Latino ambassador to take hip-hop to another realm, you know what I mean, to another territory.
Right.
And that's kind of how it felt. And I remember, in that era, in that time, you'd go to, they had never heard hip-hop. A lot of Latino countries at that time weren't giving it a chance.
Right.
And when I showed up with this music, I remember right on the interview, they'd ask me, like, why, if you're Latino, why aren't you doing salsa music? Why are you doing this black music? And they'd ask you just like this, right on live TV,
Wow.
And then I'd have to go into ambassador mode and go, look, hip-hop started in the South Bronx with Puerto Ricans and blacks and Cubans and white boys and everybody. And so I'd have to explain this. So then I realized that I was becoming an ambassador for it, and the Latino face poster child, if you will, for hip-hop in those countries. And I think that's the impact of that album the most, because it opened the door and then it never closed the door,
right?
For the rest to come in and be proud to be Latino just as much as Public Enemy was proud to be black.
Right. Also on the album, though, you did, and this had also been a single too, but this and Eazy-E. So how and why did that all come about?
Man, on the Rhyme Fighter joint, yeah.
Yes, Rhyme Fighter is a song on Escape from Havana.
Yeah. Well, we always felt. I know for myself. I'll speak for myself on this one. I've always felt like Eazy was disrespecting hip hop culture, the way he was bringing it.
Okay.
You know, we didn't feel like that was hip hop.
Well, explain. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, up to that point, hip hop was a funky beat, and it was about styles, and cadences and stuff like that, and it was predominantly New York out there. So learning from where it came from, you know, there was like an unwritten way of how you're supposed to do it.
Okay.
Right? How you're supposed to put it on. And so we were always on East Coast principles, peace, love, unity, having fun, rock the house, all that
Zulu
type of
Nation.
stuff. Right. And with a mixture of 5% Nation
Right.
in there, and that's how we were raised in the hip hop culture. We didn't really look at it like, okay, we got to bring our demographical problems or issues to the music, because life was hard enough as it is. We always felt like, okay, we're versatile enough of MCs to talk about something other than, you know, police brutality or the drug wars and the drug killings that was going on, you know, the gang banging, you know, people living, people dying, people getting shot. So we always felt like, well, let's talk about something else, you know? And so that's why I went at him.
Interesting. So what, in retrospect, what about and why was it him as opposed to a Ice-T or a Toddy T or arguably even a Mixmaster Spade that were from L.A. areas? Why Eazy-E compared to those guys?
I don't know.
Okay. It just
I really don't know. I don't remember. What I do remember was when one time we walked in a jam, and it was me and Cypress and maybe Crazy D, who was the only Mexican who used to be in NWA.
Right. Crazy D is down in effect.
Right. And we saw in there was Eazy and Ren and Doc, not Dr. Dre.
D.O.C.
D.O.C.
Right.
And the funny shit was, there was a photographer there for La Opinion newspaper, and he came up to me and Eazy and said, I want to get a picture of both of you together. And Eazy was cool as hell. He didn't trip, and I didn't trip. It was just like, okay. I thought it might have gone down in that building that night, you know, like, oh, shit's about to go down. It's the first time I see him after calling him a sucker on record, and, you know, nothing popped off, and, you know, it's just one of those things. I don't know if I was protected or he was protected or we were both protected, but it didn't go down like that. And I won't say that we became good friends or we were doing power lunches and shit like that. And we weren't, you know, having each other's cell phone numbers. And at that time, our Motorola beepers weren't exchanged or anything like that. But it was just something that, you know, he just like, okay, whatever. And I was just like, okay, whatever. And we just kind of kept it pushing.
That's interesting. So also at the time, of course, Frost had been coming out and stuff, Kid Frost at the time, later changed his name to Frost. So for you growing up in Southgate, in L.A. County and stuff, what did you see once Frost was getting recognized and kind of the pride or people rallying around him being Mexican in LA? Because, you know, for me, it's, you know, being from Maryland and being white, when I listen to rap, I just listen to it. Do I like it or not? But I know that different pockets and different, you know, demographics have their preferences based on their background, whether it's a city, racial, ethnic, whatever it is. So what did you see in LA with the Mexican population in particular with Frost?
Well, what I remember, I heard Kid Frost for the first time in 1984, somewhere in there, at a record called The Terminator or something like that.
He's been at it for a long time.
Yeah, and he wasn't rapping in Spanish yet. And if you hear him tell it, he'll tell you I didn't start wanting to rap in Spanish till after I heard Mellow Man Ace Mas Pingon.
Right.
And so I like to take credit for turning him proud to be Mexican.
Congratulations.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So, but nah, I mean, we were just like, he didn't really, on our block, he didn't stick out yet. He didn't, the record Terminator, it was like, okay, cool. But he didn't pop out.
Right.
He didn't pop out like that. You know what I mean? And that's not a diss on him. I'm just saying that when he really found his identity and his niche, he really stood out.
Oh, yeah.
He popped out,
Big time.
And so, I mean, we at that time, too, it was so competitive, everything and everybody. And we were out trying to take each other's heads out, You remember, it was,
oh, yeah.
Hip-hop was don't bite, don't diss, don't all these other rules that were.
As Boogie Down Productions said, you know the rules.
Yeah. It's nothing like it is today. And, you have rivals.
No, it's a combat sport back then.
Yeah, yeah.
Literally and figuratively.
And so, you had to fend for yourself and stick up for yourself even when nobody was talking shit.
Right.
And it was really competitive. I mean, but it stayed on the mic.
Right.
It never went to the gun clapping and that, not at that time. Not at that time. That wouldn't happen till later. And then, of course, now it's just out of control.
So speaking on that, why do you think it changed from everything being on record into getting into actual violence as opposed to recorded violence?
Man, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is Pac and Biggie.
Okay.
Right? Because that's really where guys started to get clapped. I mean, the Scott LaRock thing, rest in peace.
Yeah, that wasn't rap related. That was over a girl.
Yeah, so we don't count that.
Right.
We don't really count that. We lost a great one. Excuse me. Now, we have to go to the Pac and Biggie thing.
Okay.
A lot of us that were on the outside looking into that, we all had peoples in New York, and New York rappers had peoples in the West Coast. So realistically, for us, the MCs, there was no beef. There never was.
Right.
But the media blew it up to make it seem as if there was, when it was just an isolated incident between two dudes.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because in my book, The History of Gangster Rap, I have a chapter, and it's called The So-Called East Coast-West Coast War.
Yeah.
Because obviously Tupac is from New York. Tupac grew up in Baltimore and then moved to the West Coast, but more significantly in that era, he had his One Nation project. On All Eyes on Me, he's got Redman on there, he's got Method Man on there, so clearly in the midst of all this, and even on Hit 'Em Up, in the midst of all this, he clearly doesn't have beef if he's working with Method Man and Redman from New York and New Jersey.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, he had the One Nation project with, Boot Camp Click, Nice and Smooth, Tretch, and others. Tretch is his friend from Jersey.
Sure.
But then on top of that, he also said, this is not about the East Coast. I told y'all that. So that was always very disappointing to me, and that's why I dedicated a lot of time in my book about that, because to me, and I believe I put out a good case, and I think the evidence is there to show, yes, Tupac and Biggie, created a lot of the atmosphere, but the magazines, the rap media, sadly, unfortunately, really fanned those flames to really make it worse. And that's something that I, as it was happening, I was very disappointed at. And as I was writing my book, The History of Gangster Rap, it just made me rethink about all that stuff. Sure. Because, Method Man's talked about it over the years, as I've interviewed and talked to Talib Kweli and others about it too. And it's just very disappointing that the rap media really had a big thing to do with creating this division. And it's really sad. Very sad.
And again, it was an isolated thing. It really was. The rest of us were like, I don't hate, I don't hate Charlie Chase. I don't hate Gangster. I don't,
Right.
And they were the same way. And when we'd see each other, it'd be all love and peace. It was a good time there that nobody went to each coast either because we didn't know,
Yeah, I remember,
who was taking it personal.
Yeah, J-Rose told me that when the Alcoholics would be going to New York, because they, of course, work with Diamond D on their, the Next Level song during this whole time. And, of course, they work with Old Dirty Bastard for Hip Hop Junkies. But it's like...
A Native Tongue.
Yeah. So all this stuff it's just very weird. But J-Ro had told me that when they would go to the East Coast, people were like, yo, man, you're cool to come out here. They're like, we ain't got no problems with y'all. Like, what?
Yeah.
But they were reaffirming the fact that it was cool, and, the people in the West Coast didn't hate anybody. But anyway, that's unfortunate and thankfully part of history now. It doesn't really, it's not really like that anymore.
I mean, and you got to remember there was C. Dolores Tucker,
yeah,
and these other people,
yeah, Tipper Gore and the PMRC,
yes,
and all these organizations,
Dionne Warwick,
Calvin Butts,
all these people, and then that's really, there's rumors, and I kind of believe there are rumors, but I believe that it was true when they said that at that time it was a conspiracy to knock off that generation of MCs. So that
the conscious rappers, you mean?
they could then usher in all this buffoonery you see today.
Well, we'll have to talk about that later.
Sure.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of information, or at least a lot of things that I would argue disprove that.
Okay.
But that's a whole other thing. I want to make sure we're talking about Mellow Man Ace related items.
True indeed. True indeed.
But yeah, I don't know about that. But as your career progressed, you had another album with Capitol, but then also at the time, this is when Sen Dog is getting big and Cypress is starting to, really explode with their first album, the self-titled album that came out in 91.
Mm-hmm.
So as, like, what were you trying to teach or show Sen, Be Real, Muggs even, because Muggs had the 783 album that came out on Geffen, Coolin' in Cali, but it didn't really super crack in the way that even Mentiroso did. Yeah. So what were they asking you? What were you able to teach them or show them or what have you to help them get Cypress Hill to what it would become?
Well, we didn't really talk about anything in particular. Like, they didn't just come to me and ask me questions. What I did do was I would put them on stage with me and let them freestyle during my sets and concerts and whatnot, right? And Muggs was always the kind of guy you couldn't tell him anything because he knew it all anyway. You know what I mean? He's got that East Coast in him where, he's not going to ask you anything.
Okay.
No, and that's not a knock on him.
That's just how
it's just how Muggs is wired. So it was something that we were just putting into action on this side with me was I'd put, Sen on Arsenio Hall. I think he's even on the Soul Train with me. And other shows that weren't television, that were just live shows. I'd have both of them. I'd give them each, I give them 5 minutes to, on another promoter's dollar. You know what I mean?
Right.
To get on stage and spit. So I think within that were those conversations of, because I remember when they first came in, they were very green and they wanted to gangbang on DJ Quick and they wanted to talk shit on Tribe Called Quest, and that's when I told them, look, man, you can't do all that. It's not about that anymore. This is about turning the cash register, doing what you got to do, and making a career out of it. Like, nobody's tripping like that anymore at this level.
Right.
And I think they got that really quick.
Well, that's good. And then what do you think?
Oh, well, when the Ice Cube thing started, then that shit was out of control.
That was years later, though.
Yeah.
But that being said, what do you think? Obviously, knowing Sendog extremely well, and the rest of the crew too. But what was it that made Cypress Hill succeed? Like, what made them successful? But then also, what do you think the fans, like, what did they do that was so different musically, from your opinion?
Man, the whole shit was infectious, man. You know what I mean? When you looked at it, I remember their situation early on was a lot like my situation, where my first single on Capitol, Rhyme Fighter, didn't do much. And they basically came to me and said, hey, man, if this next single doesn't do nothing, we're dropping you, basically. And this is the end of the road.
Right.
We're going to flush away that 7-album deal, and you're out of here, you know? Doesn't have a place. Their first single, the Funky Feel one, was the same kind of thing as my Rhyme Fighter. Couldn't give it away.
Right.
But then it was a combination of them going to New York and shooting How I Could Just Kill a Man video there, and having Ice Cube, who happened to be in New York at the time, come and support them.
Right.
And then having a name like Cypress Hill, there's a Cypress Hills Brooklyn as well.
And I remember people thought they were from New York.
People thought they was from New York. So New York accepted them as their own, thinking that they was New Yorkers. Ice Cube knew they was from L.A. and they just happened to be in New York, so let me just go jump in the homie shit. You know? They from L.A. I need to be out there with them, right? As it took on legs and started to walk and run and
jump and
get to leap out of buildings, I think what people thought most about it was the uniqueness of B Real's voice, you know, and how it would, and his rhyme skill.
Right.
His rhyme skills were insane.
Still are.
It still are. And I think that is what with the they're like a Bermuda Triangle of a group. Here's why. Because you got B Real's voice, Muggs' eerie beats, and Sendog just yelling stuff. So it's a three-headed monster of things that you're hearing and that come and hit you from many different angles according to how the record's panned for that particular song. And I think, you know, people like a fucking party. And their thing ended up almost being like a second coming of the Beastie Boys. But instead of crushing Budweiser bottles and cans on their heads, they were rolling joints and talking about weed. And some people wanted to hear that already.
Right.
You know, people were ready for that. And so I think that was what set them apart. And I mean, later everybody would start talking and rapping about smoking weed and take their ideas, you know, and the hard part about that is how do you keep following it up when everybody's biting,
right?
You know, and
that happened to Das FX too.
Happened to me too, where the record company started, let's find another Latino that's rapping Spanish and bilingual and do all this other stuff, you know. But you know, for them it was the second coming of the Beastie Boys. Realistically, that's the way I looked at it.
Okay. And then it's interesting with you, obviously, because of having a lot of bilingual stuff early in your career, that was clearly part of what was being promoted. And then obviously the album title, of course, Escape from Havana, put that out there. Cypress Hill promoted it with Latin lingo and different things on the project, but it was not as big of a quote-unquote marketing thing, I don't think. I think that was a later, maybe people got into it and then they had their Spanish albums and different stuff. So looking at it now, do you think, how did that affect you? Would you say, was it positive, negative, no effect? Do you think it gave you your career? And then how does that compare to what happened with Cypress?
Well, I mean, you have to remember, like I said earlier, it was a really tight unit, and hip-hop was about unity at that time.
Right.
We were a really close, tight-knit unit. So on my first album, B Real wrote a song called Talkapella, and he wrote another song called River Cubanos for me. So on
That's
their
the one
first,
Muggs produced, right?
Yeah, Muggs produced it.
Right.
On their first album, I wrote Real Estate, right? And so it was one of those things where, like, we're going to help each other make it. It wasn't so much let's get jealous of the other's success or,
right,
you know, envy You know, no, it was like we were trying to help each other get somewhere, get to the top. And I just happened to be the first one to pop off. You
Gotcha.
mentioned 7A3's record before. It didn't have that explosion effect to it. So for our block, you know, Mellow Man Ace, that whole thing, it didn't even start off to be a Latino thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember correctly, Rhyme Fighter was the first single, and I'm riding on a horse and shooting ducks and
Right.
all that stuff. Shot up on a ranch where they shot MASH, you know, up there. And we were just trying to figure out what my angle and my niche would be at that time. So that by the time we put out the Mentiroso with the Welcome to My Groove on the flip, I had more of a polished look, because at that time they had a thing called A&Rs, right? Which they don't have anymore.
Well, they don't have artist development at all.
They don't have artist development anymore. At that time, I got with my artist development person. Her name was Joy Bailey at Capitol Records, and she said, Ace, we want to try to go, you know that shirt you wear with that hat, with the Cuban hat thing? We want to do a photo shoot with that. And I said, okay, sure, yeah, you know. And then it turned out to be the album cover, and set myself apart from Big Daddy Kane, from, you know, LL Cool J or Kool Moe Dee. It gave me my own distinct look, and it happened almost accidentally. But it stuck. So for Cypress, you know, their thing was they just wanted to be stoners, you know what I mean? Like, they didn't want to be dancers anymore. They wanted to come out of my shadows a little bit because they were my dancers, you know? And so, you know, for them, it was let's just do what we do with these bucket hats and these goatees and create a look to match the music. And I think, you know, for both of us, it worked out. It all worked out. So by the time that I believe How I Could Just Kill a Man, who might have been the second single, came out, it was all well put together.
Gotcha. Okay. And then as you look back to on the production side, I mean, early in your career, working with Dust Brothers, working with Def Jeff, working with Muggs, like what of those lessons that you learned way back then have you been able to apply throughout the course of your career as a musician?
I think the most important lesson was Muggs had a sign in the studio called "What's the Hook?" It just said it on the wall. What's the hook? So that's the part I remember the most, and I took from that the most. Like, when I create a record, make sure that it has a catchy hook, you know. But, you know, for me, I ended up falling out of love with Capitol Records and with Fame in the early 90s based on, you know, not knowing the expectations of a record company at the major level, and not being allowed to expand my horizons in terms of creativity, because on that third album that I was cutting, you know, hip hop was changing.
It changes fast.
It changes fast. And at that time, we had groups like DOS Effects coming in with bump skiddly, bump, bump, you know. And then you had Drez and Black Sheep with Engine number 9, you know. And you had a lot of, like, versatile, real hip hop dudes coming in. And when I wanted to continue to keep showing Capitol what was cool in terms of staying versatile as an MC, keeping them in love with what they fell in love with, that made them sign me, they were like, nah, we found your niche. We want all your records to sound like this. And so for me, I just couldn't play that game, you know. So, you know, I left the $500,000 on the table and walked. And, you know, luckily for me, my core fan base went with me, and I've been able to still work regardless after all these years.
Yeah, but you did also have a big a break, a hiatus of sorts.
Absolutely.
So what was that about?
the hiatus, man, I mean, I went through it. You know, I was not understanding corporate structure. I think the most the Capital's philosophy is Coca-Cola wouldn't change the color of their can now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you change your style? That's what they would tell me.
Mm.
And I was like, well, Coca-Cola doesn't have to keep up with Drez of Black Sheep and Crazy Dre's. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be different. And then years later, they got Coke Zero, Coke Cherry, Coke. You know what I mean? And the can did change. So you see, they had to keep up with the competition, didn't they?
Coke Zero.
Coke Zero.
Diet Coke.
and so for me, that hiatus, it was good for me because I went out and partied. You know, I was just living it up. I had a ton of money and that I had toured off of and went and got and came back and partied and waited for my lawyer to chop up a new deal. And and then I started experimenting a lot, you know, with LSD and stuff like that. And I started to write a record called Black Havana. And it was very Jimi Hendrix. Like you've heard the recent Cypress album, Elephants on Acid.
Right.
I was on that in the 90s. You know, and the only thing that happened there with that was the record companies were like, what happened to cute little, you know, Mentiroso man? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he got dusted out, you know what I mean? And they weren't allowing me to grow as an artist, you know what I mean? And so then that hiatus was good for the soul because I was able to realize that I didn't like the corporate structure, number one. And number two was I realized that I had to go back to my roots, you know what I mean? The roots of hip hop. Doing it because you love it, not so much for the need of a record deal.
Right.
You know? And I think that was good for the soul. And a lot of discovery happened in that time frame. You know what I mean?
Well, that's good. And you've been, you know, once you were getting back into it, then you've been putting out a steady stream of material.
That I own, yeah.
Which is very important. And now, because of all of this history that we've been talking about and stuff, you've got potentially an exciting development going on with the city of Southgate now. So they're in discussions, or it's looking like they're going to name a street after both you and Cypress Hill, right?
Correct.
So how and why did that come about?
I think it came about mostly because of when Cypress got the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It kind of opened the door for everything else, realistically. And, you know, me, after writing so much material for Cypress, especially on half of their Spanish album, you know, I get the blessings too. You know what I mean? And people know that there's no them without me, or, you know, vice versa, kind of. And it's like, for me, it's you know, it's an extension of their blessing. So, and they know, the city of Southgate knows that I came out first and put the city on the map, and kind of how that lineage went and how I introduced them, you know. So I'm getting blessed the same way, you know. And it's just amazing, man. I feel like if nothing else happens in my career, to know that I could drive down my city and walk on my own street, that's just magic, man. It's magic.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then what else, for people that obviously been listening, what else are you working on or you have coming up that people should be checking for?
Most def. What has me really excited, I mean, these days, even more than trying to make a new song or anything like that, of course, I perform. I just finished the Dub Magazine tour. I continue performing. So just, you know, check me out on my Instagram, Mellow_Man_Ace, for any concert and show updates like that. But what has me really excited too is I started a company, a content creating company, and we're doing our first project based on the impact that Latinos have had on modern day culture. And now it's not just hip hop, it's not just music, it's across the board. So we're giving props to as far back as, Desi Arnaz to Roberto Clemente to Cardi B to whoever could be next, you know what I mean? And we were just going to highlight those accomplishments and because we saw that we took a look at the territory and the terrain and we saw that there was something missing there in terms of that story. So many times you hear the Motown story and you hear the Compton story and you hear, you know what I mean? And so we just wanted to fill in the blank, if you will, and that's the project that really has me excited. It's called Dale Duro. So be looking for it.
And translate that for people that aren't.
Dale Duro means go hard,
Okay.
Go hard because that's what you really got to do in order to compete in the entertainment field. You have to go hard.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Nah,
No, I know. People underestimate it, and they really, I'm not obviously a rapper or anything, but when people come up to me and they'll be like, man, you wrote a lot of articles, or man, you did a lot of stuff. I'm like, yeah, because this is what I love and this is what I'm trying to do. It's not that nobody handed me these jobs or stuff. I had to work for it.
Sure.
And, I've been fortunate and blessed to have all these opportunities I do, but it's like I've written more than 3,700 articles. They didn't write themselves.
Yeah.
I had to do it.
Wow.
So, and all my books and my other stuff. So it's work, man. It's work. So, well, there it is, y'all. Mellow Man Ace has come through here to the Soren Baker Show for Digital Soapbox Network and Unique Access. Ace, I know you just gave it out, but give it again, how people can find you on social media.
Most def, it's mellow_man_ace on Instagram and Twitter, and it's just Mellow Man Ace at Facebook.
Perfect.
Or you can check my website, mellowmanace7.com.
All right. Well, I'm glad you came through, man. It's always good catching up with you, as always. Definitely. Mellow Man Ace here on the Soren Baker Show. We appreciate it, you guys. Thanks for listening on the Digital Soapbox Network and for liking, subscribing, sharing, downloading, all that. And then also for checking us out on Unique Access on YouTube. We'll catch you guys next week on the Soren Baker Show. Appreciate it.
In the beginning, hip-hop was ruled by the East Coast. Then the West Coast rose to prominence thanks to gangster rap.
Straight out of Compton, crazy motherfucker named Ice Cube.
Hip-hop changed the world. Gangster rap changed the narrative.
I'm representing for the gangsters all across the world.
And then changed the world again.
Cause I'll come and take your life away.
The history of gangster rap features unheard stories, unseen photos and documents, all with exclusive interviews from the founders and players who shaped gangster rap.
I think a real gangster rapper has to scare you a little bit.
The history of gangster rap written by veteran rap journalist Soren Baker. In stores now.
Yo, what up? This is DJ Quick. Be sure to pick up my homeboy Soren Baker's book, The History of Gangster Rap, if you really want to know what we do.
Be sure to check out The History of Gangster Rap by Soren Baker. He's official.
History of Gangster Rap features exclusive interviews with Ice-T, Snoop Dogg, MC Ren, the D.O.C, and dozens of others. The History of Gangster Rap, a definitive look at how Los Angeles changed rap forever.
In Los Angeles, the streets definitely set the tone of the hip-hop music.
At 19, I got a $50,000 car.
My whole angle always was, I'll be street, but I will always tell you the horrors that go along with this life.
There will be penalties and casualties for just wearing the wrong color in somebody's neighborhood.
And once gangster rap made it from the streets to the TV, the genre exploded.
With Fab 5 on Yo MTV back with NWA.
Yo MTV, it just catapulted us from being local heroes to national gangbang rappers.
The history of gangster rap discusses it all from 1980 up till today.
It's always gonna be shit happening in the streets. You know what I mean? So it's always gonna be something to talk about.
The history of gangster rap in stores now.